there. Hello, bruvs. We're back with a new book. I was going to read that one book about the fiction book where Hitler in his youth or whatever it was called, but I can't find it, so I'm sure it's not hard to find, but I just didn't see it. So I saw this book first, and we're going with it. The Beautiful Side of Evil by Johanna Michaelsen. It's a 200-page book. A spider? It was a spider, wasn't it? Poor little guy died. This is a true account of a young woman who, while in search of spiritual truth, became a personal assistant to the psychic surgeon in Mexico for 14 months. Then, in answer to her prayers, God revealed the true source behind the miraculous healings she witnessed. Lifting the veil of deception, he allowed her to see the evil behind the outward appearance of beauty and holiness. Johanna Michaelsen reveals how this deadly deception is not isolated to her unusual experience, but rather is invading our everyday lives, even our churches. Here's this book, 1975, no, 82. It was first published, oh wait, those are just from the, all right, 1982. Forward. The last 15 years have witnessed an explosion of interest in psychic phenomena and parapsychology that is unprecedented in history. This fascination with things that are viewed as supernatural, or at least extra-natural, has permeated almost every level of society. This is especially true in the academic community, where only 20 years ago such interest would have been considered absurd. What's up, bruv? But now, after almost 2 centuries of general skepticism toward the miraculous, the secular world is being bombarded with growing evidence that there are indeed forces beyond the scope of the normal scientific process. Most major universities have added parapsychology departments that are not just studying the history, but exploring the mystery of the occult. There is definite validated evidence that unexplainable phenomena are taking place in various occultic practices. Medical doctors have verified many incidences of supernatural physical cures performed by psychic surgeons. The beautiful side of evil. The question this book raises and truly answers is, are these various psychic experiments and cures beneficial, or could they be an opening for enslavement to subtle spiritual beings of incredibly destructive intent? Johanna Michaelsen is uniquely qualified to write about this subject. I have never met a person who has so sincerely and wholeheartedly explored this area. She studied with me at the Light and Powerhouse School for several years. I have talked with her about her experiences at least 8 years. When I first heard about them, I honestly wondered if they could be true. They were just so incredible, it was overwhelming. But since that time, I have had ample opportunity to verify the facts of her life fully. Testify that this amazing story is absolutely. Johanna has become an expert in the psychic field and a gifted and powerful communicator about its implications to all who experiment with it. This book is desperately needed when things predicted long ago by the Hebrew prophets are all being fulfilled before our eyes. The prophets particularly warned of a time when malevolent spirits would work amazingly deceptive miracles. I believe that we are witnessing the fulfillment of that prophecy on every side. Words cannot express how strongly I recommend this book. I believe everyone should read it, whether or not they have been involved in occultic phenomena. I believe that this book could literally save your life. Hal Lindsey. All right, move along. The Encounter. Let's see how many chapters are there. 18 chapters, 205 pages. Very short chapters, which is nice for my purposes. Hopefully I can get to, oh, look at that turning point. Oh no. It coincides with Charlie Kirk. Chapter 1. The Encounter. The tension was almost unbearable as we searched through the dark streets of Mexico City. We were lost. I peered at my watch in the light of a passing car. It was no use. Almost 8 o'clock. We were too late to witness any of the operations scheduled for that night. I felt a flash of anger as Tom, I don't know why it has an asterisk, stopped the car again to analyze his directions. It probably didn't matter that much to him or Nora, his secretary, whether we arrived at Pachita's on time. They had both been there before to see her work. In fact, Tom had an operation in which he claimed a rusty hunting knife had been plunged into his kneecap in order to repair an old football injury. No anesthesia or sophisticated antiseptic had been used. His knee was now fully healed. As for myself, I knew I could come again, another time to see the medium work. But Kim, my sister, was leaving Mexico the next day. This had been my last chance to make her understand. Well, there is nothing more I can do now, I thought. It's in God's hands. I took a deep breath and forced my muscles to relax. This is it. We're here, Tom exclaimed as he slammed on the brakes. He jerked the car into a parking space in front of an old market. The pungent, sweet odor of rotting garbage in the gutter stung my nostrils as I stepped out of the car. Even a lifetime in Mexico, born and bred, had not accustomed me to that smell. We made our way across the dark street to a grimy white metal gate set into a long wall. The night was clear and still, yet as we stood there, the sky suddenly filled with a host of unseen beings who swirled and spun around us with a sound like that of wind gusting through tall trees. My heart pounded in my throat. I was afraid. The others seemed oblivious to the motion all around them. I said nothing. The metal gate swung open even as Tom knocked. We stepped into a narrow courtyard crowded with people, some obviously wealthy, others clothed in rags which spoke of abject poverty, but all drawn together by a common bond of suffering which reached out into the unknown for the ray of hope and healing denied them by conventional medicine. A loud, angry voice broke through the hushed murmurings of the crowd. It belonged to a distinguished looking man with graying hair and mustache. He was dressed in black slacks and a white shirt with sleeves rolled up to his elbows. It was obvious from his manner that he held a position of authority. I backed out of the way into a corner by the gate as we waved as he waved a fist at Tom. There you are, he shouted. Come here. I want to talk to you. His English was excellent, though heavily accented. Do you know what happened here today? I will tell you. One of your mind control people showed up with motion picture cameras and demanded he be allowed to photograph Pachita during the operations. He said you sent him and refused to go when I told him this is not a circus act for curiosity seekers. He stuck a pin into Pachita to see whether she was in a trance and then tried to strike me when I ordered him out. His voice was shaking with anger. Dr. Carlos, calm down, Tom exclaimed. I don't know anything about this. I didn't send him. I don't know whether you did or not, but I will tell you this. If you can't control your people and instill in them respect for the work that is done here, then not any of you will be welcome any longer in this place. Dr. Carlos turned and disappeared into the crowd. Tom just shook his head and shrugged. After a few moments, he followed in the direction the doctor had taken. Who was that? I asked Nora, who had come up beside me. That, she said, was Dr. Carlos. He's a surgeon, has his own practice in the area. He's been working as one of Pachita's main assistants for the last few months and is very protective of her. Come on, I'll take you to meet her. We made our way through the crowd, past an open sink filled with dirty dishes, then past a very ripe bathroom sheltered only by a flimsy plastic curtain. We were about to enter through a doorway when I heard a rustling sound above my head on the lintel, whatever the hell that is. I looked straight up into a pair of beady little eyes that glinted at me over the top of a nasty-looking beak. Oh, don't worry about her, Nora said a bit too softly. That's Ursula, Pachita's pet falcon. How nice, I murmured to Ursula in what I hoped was an ingratiating fashion. We stepped into the darkness of a small waiting room, empty but for an old metal desk and the sound of falcon talons digging into wood. The entrance to the operating room was shielded by another plastic curtain. Nora held it aside for me. I was immediately overwhelmed by the smell in the room, musty, dead roses, and raw alcohol. The electric tingling I had felt upon crossing the threshold of Pachita's home now intensified, as though this room was the source of the current. The Lord's Prayer, which I had been quietly repeating over and over since we had arrived, was now screaming in my head. I stood in the doorway, unable to proceed. I need to change hands because this is aching my hand. The small room was lit by a single bulb which dangled from the ceiling. 8 or 10 people, including Dr. Carlos, stood about talking quietly. Against the bare cement and on my right was a medicine cabinet. Past it, a rickety door opened onto the courtyard. To my left was a small wooden table, cluttered with rolls of cotton and bottles of alcohol. The focal point, however, was a large, tiered altar, which filled the left-hand corner of the room. It was covered with dozens of jars and vases, crowded with rotten roses. A picture of Christ on the cross and a large wooden crucifix stood surrounded by white candles. Next to the crucifix, in the center of the altar, was a bronze statue of Cuauhtémoc, the Aztec prince who had defiantly borne torture and death at the hands of Spanish conquistadores. At its feet lay a pair of surgical scissors and a rusty hunting knife. My eyes turned to the right side of the room. There on a cot sat a wide old woman. A worn blanket was wrapped about her legs. She was smoking a cigarette as she talked to Tom, who sat before her. I watched as her stubby hands made frequent, though tired gestures to emphasize a word or phrase. They moved often through her short gray-black hair, then over her face, which she now rubbed as though exhausted. I stepped forward and looked closer, unable at first to comprehend what I was seeing on those hands. They were covered to the wrist in dry, crusted blood. Nora and Kim went forward to meet the old woman. Where is Johanna? Tom asked as he looked around. Come on, he urged me, smiling. Pachita, this is Johanna, one of my best students. I approached and took her extended hand in my own as I looked down into a tired, very stern right eye. The left one was half closed as though from a mild stroke. I felt suddenly naked as her gaze focused on me. It was as sharp and piercing as that of the falcon on her lintel. Her gruff voice acknowledged my presence. Then the eye turned again to Tom, and I stepped back to the center of the room. I turned to look again at the altar. Waves of soft light now seemed to be coming from the image of the warrior and the crucifix beside it. Lord God, I whispered, thank you for this place. After all the years of terror, you have now brought me into a temple of light. Let me serve you here, Lord. My prayer was interrupted by the voice of a sleek young man. Tell me, what are you feeling? He asked. With an effort, I looked away from the glowing altar. I'm not sure, I answered softly. I feel I'm in the presence of my God. That's a very unfortunate statement, you prick. The young man nodded. Then you must touch the statue of Kuatimak, he exclaimed. Go place your fingers on the statue 3 times. There was a sense of urgency in his tone. Go! I hesitated, afraid for a moment. Of the still shining statue. Our Father, who art in heaven, I reached out my hand and with my fingertips lightly touched the image of the ancient Aztec warrior who was now Pachita's spirit guide, the one by whom the miracles of which I had heard spoken were performed. At the third touch, a light shock ran through my fingers. My breath drew in sharply. I felt strangely light, detached. Even the Lord's Prayer, which had been repeating over and over in my head, almost of its own accord, grew still and silent. I was enveloped in a deep velvet peace, which wrapped itself around me like a mantle on the shoulders of a priest. The man took me by the hand and led me to the old woman on the cot. Pachita, you must talk with this girl. The tired face turned to me and focused on my eyes, staring through me with a frightening intensity. No word was spoken for many seconds. Then a blood-covered hand reached for one of mine and pulled me closer. You're very sensitive, aren't you? She said softly. Are you a medium? Her words startled me and I hesitated. Well, she insisted, are you a medium? I'm not sure, Pachita, I answered. Sometimes I think so. Well, my little one, you finish the studies in mind control you have begun with Tom and then return. Then to herself she added, we'll see, we'll see. He's done. That was pretty easy. Never ask me if I'm playing. Reading the Bible. All right, morons. Let's go. 2. I don't really care what you say in there, but don't be a moron. I hope you don't work because I can find everything about you. Let this man read and chill. Thanks, bruv. I don't really care what they say, but just don't be annoying and post stupid stuff. Have your opinion, but just don't be an idiot. 2. Great Aunt Dixie. Aunt Dixie died soon after Mama was born. Dixie was Mama's grandfather's sister. Dixie was Mama's grandfather's sister. Most of the family had been frightened of her and her strange powers, yet there was a time when she was acclaimed by the crowned heads of Europe, including Victoria and the Prince of Wales. Her picture appeared in newspapers of Europe and America for over 15 years. Born Dixie Jarrett in Milledgeville, Georgia, she discovered her extraordinary gifts one night after attending a performance by Lula Hurst, one of the first so-called electric wonder girls who became quite the fashion in Georgia before the turn of the century. According to one newspaper article, the Little Georgia Magnet's performance lasted about 2 hours, during which she would, for example, place her hands upon a chair and without clenching it, raise it from the floor. A dozen men were unable to put that chair on the floor or break her hold without twisting and jerking it. Nor were they able to lower a billiard cue held between her fingers or raise it from the floor when she placed it there. She would lay her hands on a raised umbrella of steel frame, and the cover would suddenly rip off as though struck by lightning. In yet another test, she would, with one hand, raise a chair on which sat a large man and hold it in her palm balanced on an egg. The article went on to say she had many other tests, and in no city where she appeared did anyone who witnessed her performances doubt the genuineness of her strange powers. Aunt Dixie was also known as a spiritualist and an effective trance medium. Often during a seance, faces of the dead would materialize on the wall, and the entire house would shake and rattle as though in the grip of a giant terrier. She would awaken from her trance with a blinding headache and no memory of the events that had transpired. One ancient family member recollected that she could find lost articles and had tremendous strength while in a trance. She died sometime in the 1920s, alone, forgotten, and a pauper. It wasn't until June of 1975, 2 years after it was all over, that I learned of her prediction. Someone in the third generation, my generation, was to inherit her talent. Don't be stupid all your life. 3. The Intruder. Are you sure you remember how to use this, Johanna? I looked down at the loaded 32 automatic pistol in Papa's hand. I think so, Daddy, I said, carefully taking the gun. All I do is pull back the top to cock it, aim, and then squeeze the trigger. I was only a few months away from my 12th birthday, and Papa felt it was a time I learned how to use the weapons he kept in the house in case of an emergency. Our colony was located on the outskirts of Cuernavaca, still at that time a charming old-fashioned town nestled in a green valley 45 minutes south of Mexico City. Papa had built our large modern ranch-style home there 6 years before, when the colony was just beginning. Many Americans and Europeans were building homes there now, but to get into town, we still traveled 20 minutes on dirt roads that became treacherous bogs in the long rainy season. It would be another year before telephone lines reached us. Papa's greatest concern, however, was the fact that a large settlement of squatters had recently taken over an enormous tract of land about a mile northeast of us. The land was owned by a group of Americans who had, and I hold the book like this so I don't break the spine, already begun paving roads and putting in electricity and water lines when the takeover occurred. The squatters were mostly fugitives from the neighboring state of Guerrero, murderers and thieves and refugees from clan wars who simply swarmed in with their families and took possession of the land under a provision of the 1910 revolution. The land belongs to the one who works it, and possession is 9 points of the law. Overnight, their shanty sprang up, and plowing sticks broke into land once set aside for more elegant homes. The police were hesitant about entering Squatters' settlement now, since a number of patrolmen had been killed in ambush. Even the Mexican army had not been able to rout the outlaws. The squatters left the foreigners below them pretty well alone, but on Saturday nights we could hear many of the men cavorting and singing through our streets, firing their guns in drunken abandon. Papa had recently had a run-in with one of these outlaw, what does it say, vaqueros? Vaqueros. I'm trying to roll my R's even though I suck at it. The man had moved his cattle onto land that belonged to us. When Papa found out, he stuck a 45 in the belt of his white Bermuda shorts, and in Spanish, that was fractured almost beyond recognition, even after 15 years in Mexico, ordered the tall, handsome vaquero, who also carried a gun, to move his filthy cows off that land. The vaquero could have shot Papa dead before either had blinked twice. He had the reputation for it, but he saw the deadly gleam in Papa's eyes and evidently found himself respecting this brave but obviously crazy gringo. Unbeknown to Papa, the vaquero had been teaching me how to milk those filthy cows, and I was sorry to see them go. After this confrontation, Papa took to firing his gun every week or so to remind everyone within hearing distance that he meant business and was not to be trifled with. On this particular night, however, Papa was reminding me how to use a gun for a more specific reason. He and Mama were going out for the evening. Kim and I would be left alone in the house for the first time. We always had at least one live-in maid to care for us, but the latest one had been called home unexpectedly the day before, and there had been no time to replace her. Are you sure you'll be all right? Papa's face reflected his concern. We'll be fine, Daddy, I answered confidently. Well, he said, smiling, if anybody should break in, the sight of your waving that gun will probably scare him enough to send him screaming the other way. Come on, let's make sure everything is locked up anyway. I followed Papa into his room and watched as he locked the sliding door that led to the garden and pulled the curtains shut. He bolted the windows and then went into the suite Kim and I shared to make sure both doors and all windows were secured there as well. The ritual was repeated upstairs in the living room and servants' quarters. We won't be late, sweetheart, Mama said, kissing me goodbye. She looked so lovely in her soft cocktail dress. And you, she said to Kim, off to bed now like a good girl. I am leaving hungry outside to watch the house. You keep Houdini in with you, Johanna. Hungry was pure muff, or pure muff. Hungry was pure mutt, an exact replica of Old Yeller, but Papa always insisted he was an Abyssinian mountain lion hunter, whatever that was. He thought it made poor Hungry sound ferocious and exotic, I suppose. Oh, don't worry about opening the gate. I've got the keys with me, Papa said, as he kissed my forehead. He then pulled the front door shut and locked it from the outside. I could hear him struggling to put the key on his keychain so as not to lose it, as he had his other set months before. This was the only key to that deadbolt. Bye, Mommy. Bye, Daddy, Kimmy called. All right, kiddo, I said, turning to her. You heard Mom. Time for bed. She hesitated. Go on now. I'll get your pineapple juice for you. At 9 years of age, my sister was a pineapple juice at bedtime addict. I watched her gulp down her fix, then tucked her in. I settled under the covers of my bed and picked up volume A of the encyclopedia I had been reading. I could see Kim asleep across the suite. Come, Hootie. The little white poodle jumped up and curled into a knot at my feet. The hours went by quickly, then footsteps. Mother's sharp high heels, followed by Papa's heavy tread, thudded down the 6 stairs that divided the living room from the bedrooms. Hootie sprang up and began growling softly. The high heels stopped at my mother's room. The door was yanked open, then slammed shut. Then my father's footsteps stopped at his room. That door was also jerked open, then slammed. Kimmy sat up, startled, and rubbed her eyes. Oh, she murmured, Mommy and Daddy are home, and fell back to sleep. That's odd, I thought. I didn't hear the gate open. Oh, shut up, Hootie. The little dog was still growling on the bed. Outside, I could hear Hungry, frantically howling and barking. Cows must be on the street again, I thought, as I got out of bed and went into the hall. I opened the door to Father's room to say goodnight. Dad, I called. Daddy, he wasn't there. Probably out in the garden, I reasoned. I knocked at my mother's room. No answer. It was empty. There was no way she could have gone past me. Something's not right, I said softly, suddenly frightened. I hurried back to my room and picked up the gun. Come, Hootie. The little dog jumped off the bed and followed me to the door. He stopped at the threshold and, snarling viciously, backed away, refusing to go further. Kim whimpered softly in her sleep and tossed restlessly under the covers. I stepped into the hall and walked up the stairs, the gun heavy in my hand. I reached the top and stopped. I felt a dead, clammy chill, as if I had stepped suddenly into a giant icebox filled with dead fish. The presence of something evil permeated the air, and I began to shiver. The front door was standing wide open. Mom, Daddy, silence, but for the continuous howling of the dog outside. I walked hesitantly across the room and shut the door. Soft, low laughing began to echo in my head, a kind of laughter I had never heard before, and which filled me with terror. Slowly, deliberately, I moved into a corner chair and pointed my gun towards the door. I looked down at my watch, 11:20 p.m. 35 minutes later, a car turned into our driveway. I heard the sound of the heavy metal gate being pushed open, then pulled shut as the engine was shut off inside the carport. I sat in my chair and waited. Gun pointed at the door. Hungry, will you cut out that racket? Papa shouted. There's not a cow in sight, you stupid dog. I could hear him fumbling through his keys. I ran to the door and flung it open, the gun still in my hand. What the? He exclaimed, surprised. And then, was someone trying to get in? Are you all right? My heart was still pounding in my throat. But my words were slow and deliberate as I told him what had happened. Someone must have broken in and been frightened away, he said when I finished. But, Daddy, Kim and I both heard your footsteps and the door slam, I protested, and I heard someone laughing at me. You've really let your imagination run away with you tonight, he answered gruffly. Just put it out of your mind now and go to bed. He relocked the door and went upstairs. Papa was a New Yorker, and despite having produced the first Inner Sanctum Mysteries on radio, he was still pragmatic when confronted with something of this nature in his own home. Mama, I didn't make it up. Something else has moved in. Can't you feel it? I looked up at her anxiously. Mama said nothing, but hugged me close for a long while. The being who moved into our home that night was not a pleasant one. He seemed to take a grim delight in frightening me. One night, several days after his arrival, I awoke suddenly from a deep sleep. A voice was groaning softly as though in pain. My eyes shot open. There at the end of my bed, suspended in midair, floated a grotesque head, severed, oozing blood, and gone, and gore at the neck. The thick black hair and heavy beard were matted with blood, and the mouth hung limp and open, letting the groans escape it. I lay still, paralyzed with fear, my eyes fixed on the apparition. Then the groans changed to a soft, deep laugh that slowly faded with the head. On other nights, I would walk into my room and see a severed arm, dark and hairy, lying on my pillow. After a few seconds, it would fade away, while the same slow laughter surrounded me. Over the years, several maids quit and many refused to spend the night in our house, saying that something gave fright in it. Yet it apparently never manifested itself to Mom and Dad. There are other memories of those years, happier memories of trips to the local pyramids to collect arrowheads and rocks, of hugging soft kittens and romping through lush green gardens with assorted dogs as we helped Mama tend to her hibiscus bushes. There were days spent in the sunshine by the pool with Daddy, and lively games of checkers in which he sometimes let me beat him. And I will never forget the sound of Mama's faint Georgia accent, barely perceptible as she read from Charlotte's Web or Stuart Little, but which burst forth in its unintelligible glory when confronted with the southern fried tales of Uncle Remus. To her, Great disappointment, she never got past the first few pages with us, and I was a sophomore in college before I finally figured out what a Brer Rabbit was. That's, I still don't know what it is. I also remember ballet classes and chanting, but for a broken leg acquired at the age of 7 while practicing firebird leaps in the garden. After rehearsal one evening, and the memory of a flubbed recital which is best left unrecounted, but mostly I remember the nuns, the then austerely garbed sisters of the Sacred Heart of Mary, arrived in Cuernavaca, in time for me to be enrolled in the third grade. The nuns were formidable in their habits and seemed to move about the antique paneled halls and marble columns of the school in an aura of untouchable dignity and holiness, an illusion further enforced by mandatory curtsies to be rendered at every encounter. Need to get a different chair. This thing squeaks way too much. Or not squeaks, but groans. Underneath the blanket of that impression lived warm, caring women who, for the most part, did their best to prepare us for the world in general and college in particular, in light of which I will forever bitterly resent having been forced to graduate the year before Sister Sarah taught her world literature class. And since it's kind of a sign, turning point in a book called The Beautiful Side of Evil, seeing what happened to Charlie Kirk about whatever days ago it was, I will read chapter 4 before I stop. Turning point. Bishop Pike and his family spent a month in Cuernavaca in 1963, the summer I was 14. The senior warden of our church, to whom the privilege of hosting the bishop would normally have fallen, was ill, so the task fell on Daddy, the junior warden of St. Michael's. The two families seemed to take an immediate liking to one another and spent a good deal of time together during that month. I remember lively evenings in our home during which the bishop discussed the subject matter of some complex book he was writing while Father offered highly creative, if not altogether appropriate, suggestions for titles. The bishop brought 3 of his children with him. Connie, a year or so older which I think is supposed to be then a year or so older than I, was attractive, slender, and very popular with the American boys who had come home from school for the summer. The bishop's 2 sons fell into the typical preacher's kids category. Chris was 13 and didn't seem to like me in particular. He once took my finger and twisted it until I cried. The more disturbing of the 2, however, was Jim. At 17, he had a dark, brooding air which could erupt easily into violence. When he had been drinking, right, kids were apparently drinking at 17, it was hard for me to understand what seemed to be such overt rebellion and dramatic public outbursts. I was frightened of him, yet felt a strange affinity for him. I sensed in him the same unanswered cry for help I carried within myself. I thought of him frequently during the next few years. In February of 1966, young Jim was dead. He shot himself while on drugs in a New York hotel. His death and the widely publicized display of psychic phenomena which followed proved to be a turning point in my life. My heart leaped when I heard that the bishop was attending seances in order to contact his dead son. I wasn't the only one experiencing bizarre phenomena. Perhaps in the bishop's search I would find the key that would help me understand and deal with the beings who surrounded me. I now eagerly read any book or article I could find on the occult. Strange dreams of myself in different forms and different places came to me as I slept, and I would hear a voice within my mind tell me these were memories of different incarnations. My thoughts were filled with death and the peace it could bring. There were times I felt imprisoned by my body, almost as though I had been dropped into it by mistake. and I yearned to be free of it, although I never would have dared to take my own life. The deeper I studied, the more aware I became of the spirit's almost tangible companionship. Not all seemed to be evil. I saw dark figures by my bed, heard their soft voices calling to me, telling me what people were thinking, thoughts which often betrayed what their mouths were saying. The resulting distrust and dislike I felt for most people gradually deepened into solid contempt. Yet my feelings were generally masked in such outward composure and serenity that an old Spanish priest once called me a mystic. There was only one person I trusted, a little Mexican nun named Mother Bernardo. She reached out to me as one might to a frightened kitten. Her concern and companionship made the black depressions of my last 2 years of high school almost bearable. During this time, school had become little more than a necessary evil. I plodded through my classes, having basically lost interest in anything that was taught. I performed because it was expected. Then one day during my senior year in high school, the subject of witchcraft was brought up in class. Was it real? Most of the girls expressed skepticism. Mere superstition, one girl commented. Totally stupid, said another. How can you be sure? I finally queried, frustrated by what I viewed as shallow ignorance. There is another dimension surrounding us, closer to us than we think, filled with beings of a different kind. Is it so improbable that there are those who see them and have, perhaps, learned the secret of harnessing these forces? Perhaps even some of us here are learning to do that, I added softly. There was an uncomfortable pause before the nun in charge of the class cleared her throat and dismissed us for our break. Wait, Johanna, Terry, who had left the class moments after I had, was calling to me down the hall. I need to ask you, these powers you were talking about, can they get something back for me? Do they really work? What do you mean, Terry? I asked. Well, I know you'll think this is silly, she laughed nervously. My boyfriend and I broke up last week. Can you help me get him back? It so happened that just the day before I had read of a young English girl, a witch, who had been faced with the same problem. She performed a strange ritual alone, deep in the forest, using two clay dolls. She made a magic circle, a short wooden stake, and a fresh raw sheep's heart. Mysterious incantations completed the ritual. Her boyfriend, for better or worse, was back within the week. Frankly, it seemed a bit extreme to me. Witchcraft was something I had always been afraid of because of what, to me, were its obvious satanic overtones. Oh, don't drop it. Where was I? I read about it as I came across material on the subject, but I never explored it in depth. Besides, a lot of the ritual struck me as being somewhat ridiculous and overstated. But if Terry needed a ritual and was desperate enough to think a boyfriend worth the effort, then why should I stand in her way? I described the ritual in great detail, smiling to myself as she gasped at the mention of the sheep's heart, but she said she would do it. See you, buddy. Where was I? That weekend, no, that isn't the sheep's heart, but she said she would do it. That weekend, I received a call from Terry. All was ready. Just one small problem, though. This business about the sheep's heart. Was that really necessary? It was. Oh, well, then, could I help you? Could I help her locate one? Certainly not. You must find it yourself. That's part of the ritual. I told her, admitting inwardly that the sheep's heart was every bit as repulsive to me as it was to her. I was amazed that she was actually planning to go through with the whole ordeal. Terry tried for days to coax me into helping her. What had initially amused me was now beginning to irritate me. Finally, one morning, I turned to her, interrupting another of her plans for help, and said, Terry, you've been bothering me with this long enough. You would do better to leave me alone and to watch out for your hands. What do you mean? She gasped as she stepped back. Nothing, I said crossly, wondering why I had said anything in the first place. Just leave me alone. The next day, Terry arrived at school late. Her hands were stained a deep purple black. The skin up to the forearms had been scrubbed and scoured until it was raw and angry looking. The book is written by a Christian, I think, so if you're worried about it. I have no clue what the book's about, but I believe that she calls it all miracles are from God, so I don't know why. Don't be offended, bruv. The next day, Terry arrived at school late. Her hands were stained a deep purple black. The skin up to the forearms had been scrubbed and scoured until it was raw and angry looking. The explanation was simple enough. She had been dyeing a friend's hair the night before, and the gloves had leaked. But the look on her face plainly said she felt I had hexed her and was to blame. In any case, it was the last I heard of the sheep's heart. Later, however, several of her friends approached me in the hall. One of them suddenly held up a cross to my face with all the earnestness of Dr. von Helsing before the countenance of Dracula, just to see if I, perhaps, was a true witch after all, and would fall writhing to the floor at the sight. Ironically, it was the cross I clung to in the midst of the agonizing loneliness and despair I felt closing in on me from every side. As for Terry, she dropped the subject altogether. But when I contracted infection, but when I contracted infectious hepatitis in an epidemic at the school a month later, she sent a note on a card joking somewhat nervously about the hex she had placed on me in revenge. And that's going to be it for this reading. 4747. Nah, you can say what you want. I just wouldn't be afraid of a book. Or worried about it, so. Anyway, that's all for now. I'm at the 48-minute mark, and that's all, bruv.